Coming at you from Bellingham, Washington, this is Twonutsinthesack. I'm Julie.
And I'm Gavin.
In 1982, a movie was made that told the story of a single mother, Carla Moran, played by Barbara Hershey. The movie was titled The Entity. The movie describes a terrifying tale of a woman and her family terrorized by a malevolent force that follows the mother, tormenting her, causing her to lose control of her car, grabbing her, breaking windows and dishes around the house. The violence escalates and the children begin to be slapped and tossed around by unseen forces. But worse yet, Carla is on several occasions raped, bitten, and beaten by the malevolent entity. While trying to figure out what is happening to her and her family, she happens upon two paranormal investigators in a bookstore. Intrigued by her story, they agree to open an investigation to get to the bottom of the alleged haunting. The activity continues, and the two ghost hunters are convinced that there is most definitely something going on at Carla Moran's house. They bring in a team of investigators, and all were privy to a spectacle of spectral phenomena. The movie ends, pause for spoiler alert, with a big boss battle that ends with the specter being vanquished with the help of 1980s level high-tech equipment. As the credits roll, it is revealed that the movie is based on a true story. As we are wont to do here at Twonutsinthesack, we decided to dig deeper into this alleged true story, and we found out that as disturbing as the story told in the movie was, the actual story was much darker and more terrifying than anything portrayed on the silver screen. Tonight we're going to explore the true story of Doris Bither and the haunting that she and her family survived. So sit back, relax, and try not to get too spooked by this terrifying story.
In August of 1974, Dr. Barry Taff and his associate Carrie Gaynor were overheard talking about paranormal activity and theory. A woman approached them with her story about a haunting in her own house that was affecting her life and the lives of her children. Gaynor asked for specifics. She claimed spirits would physically attack her, doors would slam on their own, she would bump into unseen ghosts while walking down the halls of her home. On horrific occasions, she would experience spectrophilia, or sex with a ghost, but she was not a willing participant. She was being raped. Though skeptical, if even half of what the woman claimed were true or verifiable, it would be well worth the investigation. The woman was Doris Bither. A 30-something mother of four, her history is somewhat cloudy. She moved to California around age 10 with her family. She was a troubled child, and her teen years were tumultuous, filled with abuse, rebellion, drugs, and alcohol. She was disowned by her family and had a series of abusive relationships. Her 4 children, 3 boys and 1 girl, all had different fathers. All were abusive. By the time she had her chance encounter with Dr. Barry Taff and Carrie Gaynor, her life was falling apart. Aside from the paranormal activity, she was an alcoholic and suffering from some serious emotional problems. On August 22nd, 1974, Dr. Taff and his associate Gaynor pulled up to the Bither home. On August 22nd, 1974, Dr. Taff and his associate Gaynor pulled up to the Bither home at 11547 Braddock Drive in Culver City, California. Everything looked normal from the outside. Inside, however, was complete chaos. The house was filthy in every way. It reeked of rotten garbage. Dishes piled high in the sink. No one seemed to be taking care of the house in any way. Doris was checked out as a mother. The children were basically left to fend for themselves. On their first visit, Dr. Taff and Gaynor were a bit put off by the condition of the house and Doris's reluctance to cooperate with the preliminary investigation. They left disappointed. Without cooperation, there was little they could do. A few days passed, and Dr. Taft received a phone call from a panicked Doris Bither. Things had gotten worse, and the family needed help, and fast. The next 3 months were spent investigating the Bithers. It was believed that there were 4 entities in the home responsible for a wide array of paranormal phenomena. The most common entity seen by the whole family was an apparition of a harmless old man. This apparition was so often seen that the children even gave him a name. They called him Mr. Who's-It. The Bithers believed that Mr. Who's-It was the ghost of their recently deceased grandpa. There didn't seem to be anything malevolent about this spirit. It may have been the only kindness the spirit world had to offer Doris and her children. The observed phenomena was not different from the usual reportings from haunted dwellings. Strange sounds and smells, levitating pots and pans, objects thrown by unseen forces. As the investigation continued, activity reached a fever pitch, and it soon became clear that there was something truly evil behind the unusual poltergeist activity in the house, and they were physically attacking the family. They believed that 3 malevolent spirits inhabited the house. This trio wreaked havoc upon the Bither family. While the children were pushed and on occasion thrown across the room, it was Doris whom received the brunt of the spirit's fury. Doris claims that for the majority of this time, the 3 entities would attack her. 2 smaller entities would hold her down, as a 3rd, larger entity would beat and rape her during the night.
That's horrifying.
Isn't it, though?
Jesus, I can't imagine.
Though no one witnessed an apparition attacking Doris, they did see her attacked, punched, slapped, and thrown against a wall, as if phantom hands were groping and grabbing her. Also, undeniable were bruises and injuries common to victims of rape. In one of the final investigations of the Bither household, Dr. Taft assembled a large group of researchers, professional photographers, and camera operators.
And she was actually seen by a physician with these wounds, wasn't she?
Yes, and he definitely said that these were concurrent, but he was more worried about her psychological state than her claims about being haunted.
Right.
Sorry, I lost my place. Give me a second.
I apologize
It's okay.
for distracting you.
As time dragged on, with no results, Dr. Taft encouraged Doris to provoke the entity, to show itself, swearing and cursing the existence of this non-corporeal being did elicit a response. A green mist began to form in the corner of the room. As all looked on, the mist took on a muscular frame of a man. Mostly the torso, arms, legs, and head were unclear. As always, the spectacle was for the witnesses only. Of the numerous cameras in the room, only one picture provided any corroborating evidence of this encounter. The photo was of Doris Bither, sitting on her bed. A strange arc of light can be seen over her head, and several bursts of light referred to as light orbs. The orbs are mostly explained away as a reaction of dust in the air reflecting the flash of the camera. The arc of light above Doris's head, however, is not so easily explained away. It is improbable that the light was the result of ambient lighting in the room or other flashes from the different cameras within the room. The light appears to be directly above Doris. not on the wall, as the arc does not bend with the corner of the room. Unusual, to say the least. Shortly thereafter, Doris Bither uprooted her family and moved to Carson, California, then to San Bernardino, and then to Texas. She eventually moves back to San Bernardino in California, even with the Culver City home well in her rearview mirror. Doris Bither and her family continue to be plagued by demons, both mental and physical.
They say you can't run away from your problems.
And this is proof. She continued to report to Dr. Taff that she was still experiencing haunting and spectral rape wherever she went. She also claimed that the entity had impregnated her, which turned out to be false, but still weird anyway.
Totally. Yeah, that's just creepy.
Yeah. I got ghost baby inside me.
I got a baby and you can't see it. Is an invincible ghost baby.
Invincible?
Invisible! Sorry, invisible, not invincible. Sorry, just delete that.
It's alright.
Hey, can we get that picture of Doris Bither?
Yeah, I think I can find it.
We could put it as our cover photo.
Okay.
Okay, sounds good. We are wasting tape.
Yes, we are. Doris Bither died in 1995 of pulmonary failure. Was she possibly, finally, scared to death?
That's a good question.
Honestly.
Valid.
I mean, she was 59 and had a ginormous heart attack.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So, in 2009, Doris Bither's son, Brian Harris, the middle son of her three, wanted to set the record straight about the haunting. His mother and their family life agreed to do an interview. As I said earlier, Doris had a tumultuous past, a number of failed marriages and abusive relationships that left her a single mother of 4 children, a challenge that for many reasons was beyond her grasp. The Bither family grew up poor and under stressful conditions. Brian recalled, the overall feeling of everyday life was that of being isolated most of the time. The house was small, but since they were so separated physically, you felt alone and isolated. The small home was an L-shaped property. The 100-year-old home had a 2-level cellar. The bedrooms were a later addition at the back of the house.
And she pretty much neglected her kids, didn't she?
Yes.
It's horrible.
Which is what added to their isolation. Harris continued, it felt more isolated because the house had built a large reputation for being haunted, that the whole neighborhood was coming by. Prowlers, curious people, neighborhood kids would always come by trying to see inside the haunted house. At school, I used to get teased a lot for living in the house. While Doris was renting the house, it was repossessed by the city and sold to the next door neighbor, Bob Salcedo, who sold it after he heard about what was going on inside. The Bithers had moved out, and he was frightened by everything he had heard. When asked what went on in the house, Brian Harris sighed dramatically. It was all true. Well, mostly true. The movie did add a lot of things. Barbara Hershey did do a good job. It was exactly as I remembered my mother going through. The bruises on her legs and inner thighs, the attacks. Well, everything about what was reported was true. It did happen. Living in that home was hell. We all experienced some form of attack. There was pushing, biting, and scratching being done to all of us. There were about 4 entities in the home, and they made themselves known by appearing all the time. I think it took a lot of energy for them to do that. Now, according to Harris, he received less abuse. The entities seemed to be drawn to the negative and frightened attitudes of the rest of the family, especially his mother, Doris. He went on to describe what the apparitions looked like. It was never clear. When they would make themselves known, it was always like a fog, like a human, but not quite, like a silhouette, just not clear, translucent and foggy. It was like a sculpture, like a chiseled body, not a full figure, but at times we could see some of its musculature. At times it would be annoying. We'd be watching TV, and these things would just walk by like nothing. We were so used to the poltergeist at that point. We would be watching TV, and these things would just walk by like nothing. We were so used to the poltergeist that we just got used to it. We wouldn't even care.
That's sad.
When asked about the spectrophilia and his mother, he replied, "The whole rape thing was real. My room was right next door to my mother's. I would hear the attacks happening. Things being thrown, her screaming. Then she would come out of the bedroom and have all these bruises on her legs and in her thighs. There were times where we would see it happen in front of us.
Oh my God.
It was like if a man was standing in front of my mother and would start to beat her. Imagine a woman being beaten. You could see her being picked up and thrown around, the sounds of slaps, but there was no one there to actually do it." When asked about how the investigation affected his own daily life during that time, he got a little bit agitated, obviously.
I can imagine so.
Yeah. "Well, it was hell. There I was, barely out of elementary school, trying to carry on and ignore it all. There was so much commotion going on. Between Barry's team of 30 or so people crammed in a small, and I mean small room, cheering and yelling at this thing, I was in the next room trying to watch television, trying to mind my own business." It is clear that Brian Harris was not a huge fan of the investigators or their attempts to stir the pot to gather evidence of the phenomena. He described it as such. "The whole investigation lasted about 2 or 3 months, but it wasn't like Barry was there every single day. So for him to say that this could have been some sort of telekinetic thing or that my mother was creating it all is bullshit. She didn't want to have this happen. It's a possibility, but it's not like he knew what we were going through. He was not an Uncle Bob type that knew the family. He was only there for 3 months. From that, he would only show up every Thursday or so. When the team would show up, I hated it, because I knew as soon as they left, they, the entities, would become so angry that the house would come alive. It was as if the ghosts were upset that we went and told on them, like they were throwing a temper tantrum, a hissy fit. So things would start flying. We would get attacked. Things flying, pots and pans. It just became alive. They were angry at us for telling." Alright, we'll pause for a second and take a look at a letter written by Dr. Barry Taff around 2011. It reads, "Contrary to what many people believe, The case of Doris Bither, that later became the novel and motion picture The Entity, was not, in my professional opinion, the result of spectral rape, aka spectrophilia, but a rather disturbingly real poltergeist outbreak. Unfortunately, the amassed data on the case does not in any way support ghostly sex. But back in the mid-70s, in my mid-20s, such a notion was intriguing to say the least. The passage of almost 4 decades and the experience of thousands of more cases have provided this author with a rather unique perspective regarding such experiences and claims. Remember, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And while there was plenty of evidence that we were dealing with real paranormal phenomena, it is very likely it had nothing whatsoever to do with incorporeal sex, except in the mind of Doris and her children. Doris was very evasive and somewhat cryptic regarding her background, so much so that she had refused to even tell us her age, which we knew was older than ours, but not by how many years. Had we pushed Doris hard to reveal more about this hellish past, such efforts on our part might have pushed us right off the case. Had we even attempted to secure the type of background information we currently collect, such as medical, psychological, family psychodynamics, prescribed medication, names of meds, dosage and duration, as well as recreational drugs and alcohol usage, Doris would surely have shown us the door. We had no way of knowing just how utterly disturbing a life she really had led. Disowned by her own family as a young teenager and cast out to fend for herself. It's fascinating the way time has a way of providing answers to those who wait. Some years ago, I was contacted by one Javier Ortega from ghosttheory.com to interview me on the Entity case. Somewhat later, Javier also interviewed one of Doris Bither's sons, Brian Harris. Brian spoke to Javier of how his mother was banished by her family while still a teenager due to her rambunctious lifestyle and rebellious nature. How his mom started playing with Ouija boards and seances at a very early age, finally mixing such
Opening the wrong doors.
Yep. Mixing such with drugs and alcohol to quell the irritable psyche within her. Brian's interview was disturbing at many levels, in that he was continuously contradicting himself in terms of his responses to all questions asked of him, certainly damaging his credibility as a witness. It was not until Javier interviewed Doris's other 2 sons that he learned that Brian was a chip off the old mother's block in terms of drinking and drugs. However, some of his statements were supported and corroborated by his brothers. According to Doris's other sons, there were subtle amounts of paranormal phenomena present long before she moved on to Braddock Street in Culver City. They spoke of some psychokinetic events and even the occasional apparition, although I would never refer to such an occurrence as subtle. However, not long after Doris moved from Santa Monica to Culver City, a strange woman appeared at the door, warning her that her house was an evil or bad home. When Doris asked what the lady was talking about, the mysterious lady simply walked away without further explanation.
It's time to get the fuck out.
Pretty much. Shortly thereafter, Doris was beset with the paranormal attacks. Was there a connection in that unknown lady? Did that unknown lady know something?
Nobody knows.
Did that lady know something ugly about that particular ramshackle tinderbox Doris now lived in? Or was it just a coincidence? We'll never really know unless that woman, some 37 years later, comes to us and tells us. Currently, Javier is in the middle of the final stages of writing his book about Doris Bither and the entity case, which begins long before we made her acquaintance in the summer of 1974. Such detailed information may help us further clarify what exactly occurred and why some 37 years ago, although as it appears that Doris is not available to further study, we must deal with the somewhat fragmented memories of her children. At this point, he just kind of goes on and on about people trying to piggyback and or steal credibility from being on this investigation, whether or not they were actually on the investigation. So let's go back to Brian.
Sounds good.
In regard to Dr. Taft's letter, Brian was asked if he and other children had a love-hate relationship with their mother. Could that have been the cause of the poltergeist activity? The fact that she was drinking heavily could have been a contributing factor. Brian Harris responded, "Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the reason. You have to understand, my mother was drinking heavily because of what was going on.
Understandable.
Exactly. She wanted to escape, so she drank."
I do the same thing.
Barry reported she was always drunk, and that's just not true. And as far as the telekinetic or psychokinetic theories about the haunting, basically, they believed that Dr. Taff inferred that the attacks on the house were basically manifestations of the psychic activity within their own headspaces, and that everybody in the house pretty much was a psychic and or telekinetic, which means they can move things with their mind.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and utterly impossible to prove, especially with the investigations that they were doing in the 70s.
Right.
But Brian Harris had this to say. "The home was unstable. We did fight a lot. My older brother was mean to us, so there was a lot of tension in the house. My mother's boyfriend at the time left because he couldn't handle the poltergeist or the tension." Which
Plus,
was
he probably didn't want a threesome.
It was a good thing because he was a bastard. Not that he was a fatherless child. He was just kind of an asshole.
Right. Gotcha.
Okay. The telekinesis theory is possible. There was so much tension and negative energy. You have to remember that it could have been also amplified by Barry's team. There was at times 20 to 30 people in the room yelling at this thing, trying to make it come out. Camera equipment, lights, the collective energy could have made it worse. When the family moved from the house in Culver City to Carson, Brian Harris had this to say. "The new place we moved into was hell." Sounds familiar?
Yeah.
"It was in a bad part of Carson, California. There was very little paranormal activity happening. It was hell because of the neighborhood. It was a bad neighborhood and school. The paranormal stuff was very rare at the home."
Well, that's something.
Yep. Dr. Taff reported that eventually Doris and her family moved to Texas for a few years, and then back to California. at which time the children had mostly grown and moved out on their own. This is when Doris reached out to Dr. Taft and told him she had been impregnated by one of the spirits. Here's what Brian Harris had to say about that hysterical pregnancy. It's possible. I mean, my mother moved around a lot. She was so unstable. We would lose contact with her. She had so many boyfriends and husbands, I lost count. So it's a possibility that one of her boyfriends got her pregnant. It doesn't really take a psychologist, para or otherwise, to see the strained family dynamic of the Bithers. It is sad to see and say, but was it responsible for the haunting and poltergeist activities seen in the small house on Braddock Drive in Culver City, California in 1974? The story of the Doris Bither haunting is complicated to say the least. She was a mother of 4 who was struggling to make ends meet and keep her house in order. She had problems with drugs and alcohol. She was more likely suffering from some psychological disorder due to the trauma she received throughout her life.
I was just going to say the trauma from her childhood especially.
Yeah, she was definitely troubled. And this thing did not...
It was just feeding off of everything.
Yeah, and there's a lot of psychokinetic energy there that this thing could manifest and actually become somewhat real.
So that's where I was like getting all the energy from, just from all the bad stuff happening and just growing.
Yeah, until it reached a fever pitch and this
Well,
happened.
I just remember there was one part in the movie where she's just like saying it's weak, it can't touch us. You're weak, you can't touch me. Like, because his energy was low. Do you remember that part in the movie?
Yeah, because it had already
drained its battery.
Yeah, basically, it had thrown a bunch of shit around and caused a lot of stuff to break. And as far as most paranormal investigators are inclined to believe, that takes energy away. So when she's saying it's weak, maybe she knew because maybe she was psychic.
Yeah.
With all of this taken into consideration, in 1974, a team of parapsychologists, scientists, photographers, and even an author came to her house over the course of 3 months, and every time they were witness to paranormal activity. The lead investigator, Dr. Perry Taft. The lead
His name is blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. The lead investigator, Dr. Barry Taft, was intrigued enough to continue the investigation for 3 months, though his theories on the investigation changed from actual haunting to psychokinetic or telekinetic apparitions, meaning Doris herself or even her family were causing the haunting via their own psychic abilities and energies. The fact remains...
Sounds like a bad combination.
Exactly. The fact remains that the activity seemingly spiked in 1974. Ghostly events were seen and reported, and in a few instances, photographed. And for the Bithers, there were only a handful of experiences before or since. There has been no further hauntings or paranormal activities in the house, according to current owners. Were the Bithers a family of psychics? Was there an entity or entities that were drawn to their psychic energies and made their lives a living hell? Was the house haunted already, and the spirit or spirits glommed on to the family and left the house with the Bithers? A horrifying and thoroughly documented case with Doris Bither at the center of it all. With her untimely passing in the 1990s, we aren't able to get any definitive answers to any of these questions.
It's too bad nobody interviewed her while they had the chance.
And if that ain't a kick in the sack, I don't know what is.
Alright, everyone, please be sure to go to our Facebook page, Two Nuts in the Sack, and give it a like. We post all our videos there, lots of funny memes, good stuff. And please be sure to go to our YouTube channel, Two Nuts in the Sack, no spaces. Like, subscribe, comment. We would love to hear from you.
I just want to say, for the record, that when we were doing this episode, there's some really creepy shit that went on around our household. Maybe we were a little bit more susceptible, but this one was a hard one to get out, and that's kind of why it took so long.
Well, I'm a sensitive myself.
Indeed. So, thanks for listening, folks. The next one will be a little bit quicker, I hope, and swear. Well, I don't swear, but...
You do swear.
Only when I say fuck.
Okay.
Good night.